Welcome back to another episode of 22 at the Lips. I am your host, Alexis Stout, and this is the podcast. If you are new to this podcast, welcome. Thank you for being here. This is the podcast from EMS providers to EMS providers, healthcare providers, and your average everyday bystander who just so happens to stumble upon this journey. Thank you for being here. What I like to do, if you are not new to the podcast, you know this spiel. You can probably skip ahead 15, 30 seconds, but here we are. I like to have people on that either are doing really cool things, people that I've worked with, people that I'm around that have something to add to this field. Today is no different. If you are into the podcast community, such as myself, you have probably more than likely heard of the Coffee Break Hymns podcast. And that is who we have with us today, Mr. Austin Kiser. I'm not going to give his little blurb because that's not what I do. So, Austin, if you want to tell the people who you are, what you stand for, the floor is yours.
Totally. Yeah. So, well, thanks for having me on first and foremost. Gosh, what am I about? I think I have developed a disease over the past 10 years or so of like laying in bed at night and thinking about medical things. And if I don't know the answer to it, it drives me crazy. And I'll get out of bed and like research it till 2 a.m. And, God's honest truth, ask my wife. And once it's in my body, I have a need to get it out of my body. And so I do that with a podcast and reading books and teaching classes and writing books. And that's kind of what my life has become about over the past, 5-8 years or so.
Very good. Anybody that doesn't know, Austin is a flight medic. How long have you been in this field?
I have recently retired from the flight world, but it was about 12 years or so that I was in the critical care community. And then ground EMS, just like all flight peeps or flight paramedics anyway. I was a ground paramedic for about 7 years before I decided to go into flight. And then I was an EMT for 3 years before that.
And if you are not familiar with the EMS community, that is a hot minute. I'm nearing up on, I think this year makes 5 years of being in EMS, and I'm ready to call it quits. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's burnout. I don't know if it's not even for me. It's not even the pay specifically. There is something about this field that just, unless you find your little things that keep you going, it eats away at you a little bit. So kudos on making it this long.
I have an interesting thought on this, though, actually. It's probably wrong, but I have a thought on it. And that is that in EMS, you see terrible things, right? And so even if they don't directly happen to you, you can imagine them happening to you or a family member or something like that. And so your bar for like the worst thing that's ever happened to you is pretty high. And it is very difficult, if not impossible, to feel empathy for people who like don't quite meet that bar. But unfortunately for like a lot of our patients, the worst thing that's happened to them is the worst thing that's ever happened to them, right? And if the worst thing that's ever happened to them is that they stubbed their right pinky toe, the bar is pretty freaking low. And it drives all of us crazy. For me, flight was the cure to that, actually. I no longer had any type of issues with EMS once I went to flight, but ground medicine was slowly chipping pieces of my soul out of my body every single day.
My anxiety was already pretty like, oh no, sweetheart, you should take care of that before I joined EMS. Yeah. And then I joined EMS, and like, man, it's not even just like you said, the things we see. It's not even just that. It's not what call could be next. It's like you said, exactly. I picture my family, not necessarily as the patient, but like, what if this happened to my mom? What if this happened to my dad? To the point that one time I went home after a shift, sobbed in my husband's arms, and said, "Please go get a physical soon. Please be okay forever. What if something happens to you?"
Yeah.
He's like, "I'm not even 35 yet." I was like, "That's not the point. What if it could?"
Yeah. By the way, not to say that uh, we should not focus on this podcast, but you should talk to Lindsay Ewing. She deals with exactly the same exact thing. Do you know who Lindsay Ewing is?
No, the name
She
sounds familiar.
she's the if you follow any Instagram like medical pages, she's the pre-hospitalist
I
on
love
Instagram.
her.
Oh yeah,
I
Lindsay.
love her.
Yeah. So yeah, Lindsay and I are buds. She's an editor on all of my books. Um,
Her stuff is so good.
yeah, I will give you her contact information offline once we're done. Yeah, but she would totally do the podcast for sure. But no, she deals with the exact same stuff for sure. You guys can have a little co-therapy session.
Yeah, Queen, I'm also really scared. But speaking of podcasts, you have one. I have already spieled the name of it, the Coffee Break Hymns podcast. Tell me what do you mean by Coffee Break Hymns? What does that mean?
Well, it kind of morphed a little bit, but and I'm actually getting back into the meaning of it in
Mhm.
season 5, the last couple episodes. And actually, I'm recording a podcast tomorrow and going to be releasing it here in about 3 days. But really, at the beginning of COVID, when we couldn't travel anymore, at that time, I was serving as a regional educator for my air medical company. And so I CQI'd 100% of the charts from about 12 different bases. At that time, I eventually ended up with more bases than that. But when the travel restrictions started, I was CQIing all these charts, and I was like seeing some issues with some of our newer, younger clinicians. And I was like, well, if I can't like go to bases and start and do kind of these little micro educational topics for these peeps to kind of help them just get like 1% better, because that's really all you can expect out of education at any time. I was like, well, why don't I like start a podcast that's designed like just for my crews? And so that's what I did. And I was like, well, none of my crews, I know these people, they have an attention span of a goldfish. And so this needs to be super short, something they could do like while they're munching down breakfast or doing like a half-ass, like 12-minute workout that they should be doing more of. And so I was like, all right, let's do something short, 15 to 20 minutes. And it's going to be just based on like HEMS, helicopter EMS, critical care topics. And so if you look at my first season of the podcast, all of the episodes are pretty short. I think I had a crazy long episode that was like 37 minutes or something like that. But at the end of season 1, I think it was just perfect timing for a podcast to come out, a critical care podcast. And so we were getting, not like dozens of downloads per episode. We were like, hey, like 11,000 people just listen to this episode. Like, what is going on here? And then when we started looking at the analytics, I was like, what the heck? Like, only 80% of our listeners are even located in the United States. Like, we have listeners in Canada and Germany and the UK and Australia. Like, what the heck's going on here? And so in season 2 and 3, it started to kind of change a little bit, and the format started getting more long form, where I would maybe even have to split episodes into 2 or 3 parts because they were just like hours long. But that was really like why the podcast started. But after 5 seasons, I have decided in season 5, mostly out of a selfishness, that I don't have as much time to spend on the podcast, and it's easier for me to do shorter topics or smaller micro topics. In this season, we're kind of getting back to our roots and, doing these shorter, simple question, answer the question in a way that you can understand and explain it to other people. Short form coffee break podcast.
And it's super beneficial because, like, I know whenever I get in my car and I'm driving anywhere, or I'm just getting ready to go to work or go anywhere, I like to put on a podcast as not necessarily just background noise, but just something that while I'm doing something, I still get something out of the experience of getting ready to do something else, because the cranium never stops. So so
True
like
that.
I like the hour long ones. That's just me, but it is nice to have just that quick little, like, I'm scrolling through all the podcasts I listen to and I see one that's 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes. And I'm like, oh, okay, easy peasy, just like a slice of
Yeah.
pizza. I can just devour this real quick.
Yes.
But I don't know, it's a lot of good information. I wrote down my top three. We're kind of reaching back a little bit. It's just ones that I've saved over time. But what you can expect is when ACLS kills. What do you mean it kills? I don't know. Go find out. It's a good episode. The medicine cabinet murder. That's a good one. And I also really like the survival guide to cardiac arrest.
Oh, good. That's a newer episode. Yeah.
Like I said, I follow my guy.
Yeah. Yeah. ACLS kills is actually, which is really, I actually really like your list, because those are not nearly our most popular episodes. Our most popular episode still to this day is picking the proper presser. But it's a very targeted audience, obviously. And I've collaborated on podcasts before where they've talked about coffee break chems, and an episode that always comes up is my first clean kill. And so I'm glad that you brought up a different list. Sounds like you're a cardiorespiratory girl then.
Very much. Not okay, cardio, not so much, because the heart is a scary thing. It can just stop and you're dead.
It does.
But respiratory is my niche. I'm a huge fan of respiratory. I also think it's important. So, like, you do critical care, you teach critical care, you do all the things that are critical care. I do not. And kind of like what I'm going to talk about with the book, I don't plan on being a flight medic. I don't like helicopters. They scare me. And being up in the air is very unpredictable. Flying gives me anxiety.
Yeah.
Not my thing. However, I still want to know the things. And I think it's very important that even as just a street medic, you still know concepts of critical care. And one of the beautiful things about your podcast and about your books and all this stuff is that, like, you break down these topics that seem very big and scary into a way that's bite-sized and actually digestible and understandable. And it's so hard because, like, you can get textbooks, you can get different books that you read and you have to study and you have to really sit down and think. But to be able to just listen, digest, go with it, move on with my life is a beautiful thing. So thank you for your effort and helping me be a better provider.
I think that's amazing, first of all. And I've actually thought this a lot, that, when I was a ground paramedic, looking back at it now, when I was a ground paramedic, especially for the first several years, I wasn't very good at it. I hella thought I was, for sure. You are looking, I mean, a 23-year-old Austin, nobody had a bigger ego than I did. And it's only after you've, grown up a little bit and you realize that you've probably murdered a few patients, that you start to lose that ego a little bit. But, I've always thought that if I went back to ground EMS today, with all of the scope of practice restrictions that I would have going from flight back to a ground provider, dude, I would be such a better provider and such a better human being, because cool. I don't necessarily have all of these tools at my disposal, but at least I just have a better grasp of what's going on. And I think that's a common issue in EMS, especially when it comes to, anxieties or even post-traumatic stress type responses in EMS. Is I think a lot of it has to do with, dropping a patient off, the patient doesn't do well, and you're not like 100% convinced that you did personally everything that you were supposed to do for that patient. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, dog, patients die, human beings die. It is what it is. There's nothing we can do about it. But like, was this inevitable or was this reversible, but we didn't quite recognize it and we didn't understand all of the like physiology that was going on? And so, yeah, I mean, I think about that quite often actually. That I think that going back to ground would, I'd be able to like really be of good service to people. The only issue is that I don't think that I could ever go back to working shift work. No. Once I quote unquote retired from EMS, I was like, yep, done with that forever. Never going back to the 12s and 24s. Sorry, can't do it.
It's exhausting.
Mhm.
I don't know if you would agree with this, but I used to really beat myself up just because of, I don't know, just I guess when I was really fresh starting out as a paramedic, just constantly overthinking everything. And I'm not talking like, oh, I had a GCS 3, this, that, and the other patient, and they're circling the drain and I'm sweating. But even like Meemaw, who's had chest pain for 2 days, and I did a 12 lead and still dropping her off, kind of like a little bit of like, oh man, I hope I did everything right. I hope I
Yeah.
just the absolute ridiculous stress that's just unnecessary. But I had a medic tell me one time, it's not that the anxiety of it and the stress of it is going to make you a bad provider, but it's what you do with it. It's
Mhm.
taking all of the fear and moving it, helping it melt. Hold on. What did they say? Helping it move you to a right direction to do better for the next one.
Yeah.
And that's what I try to tell like newer providers and any student that I have that I'm being an FTO for, is that like it's not so much that you need to be scared of what could happen in a way that it freezes you and you're not able to, you have oh, what is it, oh man, it's a good, when you can't make a decision because you're so stressed out and scared. It's
Just frozen. Yeah.
man, there's a word for it that's not important. um so not so much that like you're so scared that you're frozen, but
Mhm.
more of you're taking this instance, you're taking this patient, you're learning from it, and you're using it for the betterment of the next patient.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I think that providers that paramedics that don't feel any level of anxiety like during or after a call, all that really tells me is that unless they've been doing it for a long time and they are like, if they're not on a call, they're in the books and they're doing like mental rehearsal, which is something I'm very passionate about. If they're not doing that all the time and they are not years and years and years into this job, right? This is like your average, newer, younger provider. If you don't feel any level of anxiety during or after a call, it just means that you have no ability to have self reflection, right? That you are so confident in your abilities that you're not open to seeing your mistakes. And mistakes are inevitable. And I'm very open about my mistakes. I mean, I think I've done a couple podcasts on patients that I've like murked, and it just is what it is. Like that is the unfortunate but inevitable part of medicine, is that we have to make mistakes in order to become better providers. Some of the things that I'm the most passionate about in medicine, like cardiac stuff, EKG stuff, and ventilator management. It's like, why do you think I became an expert in ventilator management? Because 2 weeks on the job in flight medicine, I almost killed a woman to death on a ventilator and didn't know what to do or how to troubleshoot the alarms that I was getting. And I got done with that flight and I was like, never again. That will never happen again. But unless you have those experiences, you'd never have that drive to become an expert in anything. I'm sure one of the reasons that you are so passionate about respiratory is because you probably had a negative experience really early in your career. You might not know that you did, but it probably happened.
No, it did. Ha.
We're all the same
We
people,
live and
yo.
we
We're all the
learn.
same people.
I'm just a human being who makes mistakes, but I do my best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's all we really can do in medicine, right? It's like we're going to make mistakes. Even today, I am under no illusions that I can't be put into a position where I would have too big of a cognitive load on my body to make good sound decisions. In one of my books, I actually have an example of that in my airway book, and it's a fascinating story. I'd love to share it with you, actually. And these are flight crews, right? These are like experienced flight crews that you would assume are like at least in the top half. I'm not saying these are top 90% or anything like that, but top half. And I was running a simulation lab for them, so this wasn't even a real patient, and the sim was a 5-year-old asthmatic. And I put in one confounding factor into the scenario, and that is that in their airway bag, where they keep their nebulizer, I moved the nebulizer from one pouch to the next pouch, still visible, but and literally right next to each other. And it's a mesh pouch, so you can see through the mesh and you can see that it's next to it. That's all I did. And in this call, this this nurse, like, she could not find the neb, and it got to the point where I had to start making the kid worse during this simulation because it was taking so long to get treatment on board. And so then they decided to abandon the handheld neb, and they were like, let's just do an inline neb through a bag valve mask. So then, because of her anxiety, and I've seen her put this piece of equipment together before, because of her anxiety, she like couldn't quite figure out how to get that, like, the inline neb together attached to the bag valve mask, because it's like that special little setup. And so then the kid kept getting worse and worse and worse. And I'm not being a dick about it. Like, this isn't like a 40-second period of time. There's like multiple minutes. And so then they decided to bridge immediately to an intubation, and which, in real life, you might have had to do that. Yeah. But I'm watching the intubation, and they had grabbed an endotracheal tube that I knew was not going to fit in that simulator. And this isn't a garbage mannequin either. This is like a $22,000 like high fidelity simulator. Oh. And this was like my 5th one of that day. So I knew what tube size would go into this 5-year-old. And they grabbed one that was too big because their cognitive load was like so high. And so I've positioned myself behind her, with my computer monitor controlling the vital signs on the other monitor. And so that way I could see the camera of her laryngoscope. And I watch her put it in the esophagus, and because she's freaking out that she can't get the tube in, so she just kind of glides into the esophagus. And so obviously I'm like, they lose their CO2, sats are continuing to precipitously drop, and so they're like, oh my gosh, like, I think it's I think it might be a bad tube, like, let's just throw in an i-gel. And so then they finally throw in an i-gel, and and then they figure out their neb, and the sats come up, and blah blah blah. But at the end of it, I was like, okay guys, that's the scenario, and before we debrief, don't touch anything. Like, step away from the mannequin, don't touch anything, and just tell me what you guys see. And it took like 15 or 20 seconds, and then one of the nurses was like, oh my God. And nobody had recognized this in the entire room. And these are all clinicians that have been flying for years and years and years. And in this kid's mouth was an i-gel. The endotracheal tube was still in the mouth, shoved into the esophagus, and a large decanto suction, hard suction, was also in the mouth. So there were all 3 devices like in the mouth still of this little 5-year-old mannequin. But in the moment, these amazing clinicians their cognitive bandwidth was just reduced to 0, and they had no ability to like function at a higher level thinking. And I thought it was amazing because, in that moment, I was just like, that could happen to me. Like, I could be forced into a situation where I had no ability to think anymore. And and so it kind of reinvigorated my passion for like any tiny little skill that I do. I need to break this skill up into like 5 or 6 little micro parts that I cannot forget how to do, right? That like I will train on these little 5 micro parts so hard that I could do this if I was, if I was completely overwhelmed. It would just be such a monkey skill for me that it would be impossible for me to not recognize a deviation from the norm, but even though I train, I used to train a bunch on all that stuff every day, I'm still not convinced that I could not be put in a position to replicate exactly what I saw that day. All of us could, for sure. So there's the story.
And it's easy when you're on autopilot, like especially, okay, the cognitive offloading required in those stressful situations where like you're on the right path, but one little thing has absolutely messed you over. And it's just cascading into more little things that you just feel like you're spiraling out of your control.
Yes.
And it's always that one thing that like the inline that how to do it, what it looks like, what it feels like in your hands.
Yeah.
But man, for whatever reason, the synapses are not firing and you don't know why it won't work. I've had so many moments like that where I'm just on autopilot, just setting something up. And then I'm like, something is wrong and I can't figure out why.
Yeah. Yeah. The getting derailed is, it's an easy thing to do for sure, and it really does, like, kind of going back to that topic that I had talked about a few minutes ago, the thing that I'm really I'm very passionate about, because I don't think it's a skill that's utilized very often in EMS, is just that mental rehearsal. Right? Like, picture the task in your mind, picture this condition in your mind, or this piece of equipment, or whatever it is. And just like in your mind, just imagine how you're going to accomplish that, every little detail about how you're going to accomplish that. Because in reality, if you do good mental rehearsal before calls happen, like, the physical skill is much easier than the logistics of the skill. And logistics are figured out through mental rehearsal. And so it's definitely a tool that I would, that I encourage providers to use more than they do.
One of the very few things that my English degree and then further on teaching certification has served me well is we had this I don't know, exercise where we had to teach somebody how to make a PB&J, but it's not just you open the you open the peanut butter jar and you slather it on, but you have to go through every tiny, critical, minuscule little step. And it has served me so well, because now if I forget how to do something in the exact moment, I can just go back into the back of the cranium and say, okay, if I'm telling somebody how to do this, how do I do it? Step by step, by inch, and we get it done. And that's what matters.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, when we do broad strokes like that and we miss the minutia of things, it's easy to start making mistakes. It's easy to get derailed in the moment. Yeah, that's a great analogy, actually. Yeah. How do you make a PB&J? I don't know if you were ever into these at all, but back in like the Vine days, but even, and then going into the Instagram days, those like 2 families that like rose to prominence, they used to make all these vines together, like the AB family and the Holderness family.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, what a throwback.
Yeah. The Holderness family did an episode on that, actually, like on their YouTube channel or something, on how to make a PB&J, and he was getting his son to do it, and they had to do like 30 tries before his son finally like got into the minutia of everything, but yeah, so great analogy. And you reminded me that Vine was a great thing that you
TikTok could never. Speaking of minutia and all things cognitive offloading and big important topics, let's talk about the book.
Yeah.
If you are not looking at the video, where is it? There. If you are just listening, you're missing the graphics of the cover of this book. It is the Flight Medic's Guide to Mechanical Ventilation. What other, do you have any other books? I know you said your airway book. I know you got that one.
Yep. I'm just getting ready to publish number 4, actually. And so I did the ventilator book, and then I did the clinical airway management book. Clinical airway management is a book that I'm very passionate about, because it's not just about intubation. It is about the fact that bag valve masks are murder weapons, and EMS kills people with them every single day. And the crappiest thing, I said crappy for your mom, but the crappiest thing about bag valve mask murder is that we in EMS get zero feedback about it, because we don't know, because they don't die today, they don't die tomorrow, they die in 8 days from ARDS, and in a level 1 university trauma center that you did not bring the patient to, and they're now on ECMO and dying because we destroyed their lungs in the 15 minutes that we bagged them. And so that's really what clinical airway management is about. And then my third book was a collaboration with an EMT, and I'm only willing to kind of talk crap because I know he would never listen to a podcast because he's 80 years old. But it was a collaboration with this very ancient, in the sense of EMS, ambulance attendant, not EMT, because they didn't have those back then. So we're talking a guy who worked EMS back in the early 70s. And when you just had to have a Red Cross first aid CPR card to work on an ambulance, and the ambulance company was owned by a tow truck company. And that was EMS, pre 1990s, really. And so, or maybe mid 80s rather. But I co-wrote a book with him about some kind of tales from the streets, which is the most cringy, horrible name for a book I could possibly imagine.
Your words, not mine.
As an EMS provider, if I saw that book on a shelf, the only thing I would do is walk right past it. I didn't choose the name. He was writing this book for himself. And then he reached out to me after he was completely done writing all of his stuff, because it was only 140 pages long, and was like, hey, I would like a paramedic's perspective. And this person told this person and told this person, and they knew your name and your email address. So I'm reaching out to you. So I was like, cool, man. Yeah, whatever. I want 50% of the profit from the book, and I'll give you 80 pages. And so I wrote some kind of not memoirs, but it was really my journey through EMS, from going from this young cocky idiot to actualization of realizing what my priorities needed to be in medicine, and that medicine is a lot of my identity, but it needs to be the least important part of my life, because family should be much more important, and your sense of self should be way more robust. And if you're going to work in EMS, don't half-ass it. That's unacceptable. You need to have a passion for your own education and learning, and be willing to make mistakes, and yada, yada, yada. So my part of the book, I actually really love the work that came, or the product that came out of it. But the book in its entirety, I'm not proud of. And so that's the third one. And then the fourth book that I'm getting ready to publish is the Flight Medic's Guide to Mastering Labs. And so if you're ever interested in lab values like ABGs and all the chemistries and all of that stuff, breaking it down into stuff that you can actually understand, and breaking the patho down into things that you'll actually remember without having to use any rote memorization skills. That's what that book is about. But still to this day, the ventilator book is the most popular of all the books.
It's a really good one. Like we talked about off air, and even just before the start of this episode, I am not going to be a flight medic. I am not made to be a flight medic. kudos to everybody that does. I am not going to that party. But that doesn't it doesn't mean that like I don't have vented patients. It doesn't mean that even just if I'm thinking about intubating this patient, I'm thinking 5 steps ahead. They're going to be on a vent. What do I need to do beforehand besides pre-oxygenation and the right drugs, this, that, and the other, et cetera, et cetera? What do I need to be prepared for? What do I need to plan out so that way I don't kill my patient? But it's a lot of good stuff, and it makes everything make sense. So especially also there we live in an information overload world. There are so many sources, and shout out to Master Your Medics, study aids and tools and programs that help you understand what to expect for national registry, what to expect out of paramedic school, and how to study, how to pass, how to all of this. But when it comes to the flight paramedic certification, the FPC exam, slim pickings. There aren't too there's not too much out there, and that's why it's so important to have materials like your book, like Eric Bauer, like all of these other people that are way smarter than me that have written stuff, to have these guides to read, reflect.
We're just good pretenders.
You guys are killing the imposter syndrome because you got me fooled. But like these resources outside of just when you're scrolling on social media or Instagram and you see, oh, this study came out, here's a tiny little blurb about it. Enjoy your day in the rest of the FOAMed world. But like having somebody sit down and explain these concepts that make it make sense is so crucial, because I am not the smartest person in the room, and I need things dumbed really down to be able to grasp.
You know, I thank you for that, first of all. But like, I'm the same way, right? Like we are no different in that respect. I like, people don't say like, damn, Austin, you're the smartest guy I've ever met in my life. Like, people don't say that. And so I have a very difficult time understanding topics unless I understand them so excessively and so deeply that that like the thing that I actually wanted to know is like, oh, like, that's obvious, right? It's like teaching, you know, when you're teaching like a basic EMS course and you're first teaching your ABCs, right? When you just teach the ABCs, like, that's something that they have to like memorize because they don't know what ABC is and LOC is or what a sample history is or anything like that. But those simple topics, like once you get into EMS and once you're a paramedic, those are things like a sample history, LOC, ABCs. You don't actually even think about those things anymore, right? Because there's things that are such at the surface and you understand at such a deeper level that you assess those things instantaneously without verbalizing them in your head. And you actually think that they're so obvious that every Joe Blow on the street knows what you mean when you say I assessed as ABCs, right? Because it's just such an obvious thing to you. I can't understand anything unless I try to do that. I think just like a mechanic's brain, right? That like, I don't understand the parts. I need to just understand the entire engine. And then that one little part kind of makes more sense to me. So I tried to convey that in the book, and hopefully I did okay.
No, it's solid. And even with the concept checks and the scenarios that you put in there and putting in equations, but not even just like, hey, remember this for I to E ratio. Here's every aspect of what goes into this and why. And like somebody told me one time, to really know that you've grasped the concept, you have to be able to teach it to a 5-year-old. And now, granted, I'm not bringing this to a kindergarten class and saying like, all right, kids, let's talk about I to E ratio. No, but like being able to bring it to, and like you do in the book, kind of full circle of here's all of the aspects of what we're about to go over. Here's how they all tie in together, and here's how you're going to use it to be a better clinician in your field. And for my visual learners, because I am so tragically such a visual learner, there are charts and graphs and things that make all of the synapses connect and fire. Appreciate the visuals in the book because I drown in too many words.
Yeah, you know what's funny? Don't tell anybody, but I like hate reading medical books so much. Like I hate it. I couldn't do what you did, like a book club. I'm like, I guess I'll reread Harry Potter in a book club, but uh, which I do have the Deathly Hollows on my body, by the way.
Same.
But do you really? That's hilarious. Yeah, mine's way up here on my shoulder. But we're dating the general decade that we were born. But I love writing though. It's super cathartic for me. And so it's kind of one of those weird things that, the ventilator book, it really did change my life in a lot of ways. Not just with like reach and stuff like that, but also, I mean, let's be honest, like financially, it kind of changed my life. And it allowed me to do all of the things that I'm doing now. And, and it's like 5 years ago, it was just my wife and I like teaching AHA classes as like a little side hustle. And, and today we have 16 employees and we're getting ready to open our 6th office. And, it's really all thanks to that book. But, like taking all of that stuff away, when I was writing the book, I really didn't care if anybody read it. I just needed to like get it out of my body. And so writing was just, I did it because it was really cathartic for me. I really, not really, I was certain that nobody was going to buy it. I was doing it for me and nobody else. And I was like, yeah, I mean, people that I know are going to pity buy it, you're like, oh, you wrote a book. But I had no idea, what was going to happen with that book. And I really am. And I hate when people say this, but I'm like Larry David right now. But I am like truly humbled that people like bought it and liked it. It still surprises me all the time. We still, today we sell a ton of copies through our website. And I like every time I sign a book and mail it off, I'm like, what's this idiot doing buying my book?
Message him. Are you sure you want to do this?
Yeah. That's why if, so regardless of the book, when you buy it from our website, I sign it, but I don't just sign my name. I thank them for buying it every single time. Done it a couple thousand times now. And every time I'm like, thanks, bro. Thanks for your support. Thanks for feeding my family. Here's your book. Yeah, I know that for you not looking to go into like flight or work with like a specific ventilator platform, this you probably don't care about this part of it, but the vent book is actually going to have a second edition sometime, probably summer of next year. And we're kind of rewriting it and revamping it to specifically talk about the Hamilton platform, the Hamilton T1 ventilator, that's kind of that's the G ventilator right now. It's probably going to be for, probably the next 8 to 10 years or so. So I'm actually really excited about that because I took a hiatus from like ventilator stuff for a while. And so I'm actually really excited to kind of get back to my nerd roots.
What is your website for people that need to go and, if you haven't already, obtain this book and be a better provider for your vent patients? What is your website?
It's just kisercpr.com. I was really, that's how you spell that. So just kisercpr.com. But I was really dumb, like really dumb when I started the podcast and I started writing the book. And like, I had no idea how to, like, what's a brand, and no idea about any of that stuff. So like still to this day, like Coffee Break Hems doesn't have a website. Like the RSS or the RSS like podcast feed for Coffee Break Hems is like on our Kiser CPR website. And Kiser CPR is like my real company. That's our AHA training center with all of our offices and everything like that. We'll probably do somewhere in the neighborhood of like between 12 and 14,000 students this year, between all of our locations and instructors and everything like that. We do fairly well with that stuff, but everything that I did with the podcast and with the books and everything like that kind of got swallowed up by just my like Kiser CPR. And I never had the forethought to create a new website and brand myself as a separate thing. And so now I'm just in that, I'm pigeonholed in that. I don't like, I don't think that I can change it now. It's just,
it's too late.
Yeah, it's too late. Yeah, I had no forethought, no mentors, unfortunately. With this stuff.
Obviously, you're not doing too bad for yourself, so don't take it too personal.
Yeah, I've had a lot of luck in my life. A lot of luck. Yeah.
I think this might be the most important question because it's been in my head for the past 5-ish minutes now. What Harry Potter house are you?
Obviously, I'm a Gryffindor. Please.
No.
What are you?
I'm a Hufflepuff. We may scratch this episode. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, yeah. The academic side of my body certainly understands being a Hufflepuff for sure. But I think even saying Gryffindor was probably just a basic bitch response on my part. I'm super brave and dumb.
What house was Neville Longbottom? Because who really saved the day when it came down to the wire? Based on the books, if you've read the books.
What house was Neville Longbottom?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Neville was in Gryffindor.
Exactly. So that's all that matters. You're still in good company. You are in good company.
I thought I was about to get like totally destroyed by some like trivia. And I was like, what are you talking about, bro? Like Neville was in Gryffindor.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. You're in good company.
Yeah. It has actually, it's been a hot minute since I've, obviously, into adulthood and work, it's hard to read. And most of the books I read like are not books that you want to read. They're all like business books and stuff like that. Super boring. They help me fall asleep at night. Like your next 5 moves for your business. And just like not or like strategic marketing. And so it's been a hot minute since I've read the Harry Potter books, but I remember when I first got them, my grandma actually bought me the Chamber of Secrets, and I didn't know that there was a first book. I didn't even know that it was going to be a series. And so she bought me the Chamber when I think I was 8 or 9. I was in like 3rd or 4th grade, something like that. And she bought it, and it was like this hardcover, like special art edition. It was like the European version that she bought me. And like, my Lord, then I just had something that dictated the rest of my childhood. Because as each progressive book came out, then I had to go back and like reread like 1, 2, 3, and 4 before like Prisoner came out. And then like when Half-Blood Prince came out, then I had to read like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 before that one came back out. So it's like, shoot, I think I've read the Sorcerer's Stone at least 9 times.
I'm only fangirling so hard right now because I reread them all this year alone.
Did you really?
Yeah. So it's very fresh.
Yeah. I bet I would love that. And it would remind me that like, while Emma Watson will forever and always be my first crush, that the movies do not do the books justice.
Not for a second. Not for a second.
Yeah.
Not all of them are terrible. Anyways, I'm a huge Harry Potter fan. That's not the point. Well, my guy, is there anything else you want to add in? Anything else you want to impart with the listeners? That's all I got.
Yeah, no, I mean, the only thing that I would say is, like, if you are a listener in this podcast, like, first and foremost, you are 10 times better than I ever was as a ground EMS provider. There was no, until I decided that I wanted to go into flight, that was kind of my motivating factor for being like better than an average turd. And then I started like getting kind of into, a lot of like medical YouTube channels. And I bought my very first like 1,200 page critical care transport textbook and like made my way through that thing. Really just a year before I went to flight, that was my first introduction to like continuing education. And up until that point, I had no idea that when you graduate from a paramedic program, you're kind of reading at like a fifth grade level. And it's up to you to get to like a 12th grade reading level. They don't tell you that in paramedic school, because when you graduate from paramedic school, you have little to zero experience, but you have peak confidence. Because they've kind of pounded that into you a little bit during the medic program. You're starting to think like, dude, I know some things, especially if you worked as an EMT before going to paramedic school. You're like, dude, like my EMT partner doesn't know shit. I spend 24 hours a week learning about atropine and its mechanism of action, and he doesn't know that. But but like, you do graduate paramedic school at a fifth grade reading level at best. And so the mere fact that people, your listeners are like listening to this podcast, especially if they're in their earlier years of EMS, you are 10 times better than I ever was. And so anybody who knows like of my book or of my podcast or of my work that is listening to your podcast, if you ever ask yourself like, man, like, how do I get to like where he's at? Like, not that hard. Just keep doing what you're doing, because you're clearly better than I ever was. I didn't even discover my first EMS podcast until probably 2 years into flying. I didn't even know that it was something that existed. The whole concept of foam ed, I had no idea what that was until 2015 or so. And that was a long time into my EMS career. And so that's the only thing that I would impart to the listeners, is that you can only learn so much in one day. To become like a quote unquote expert, it takes time. And like, all you're looking to do is improve by 1%, just 1% a week. And in a year, just one single year of EMS, if you just get 1% better every single week, don't try to do some bullshit like get 1% better every day. That's unreasonable. But like 1% better every single week, you've just gotten 50% better, right? You're at 150% of your capacity after one single year. And then like, where are you at on year 3 or year 4? Like, you are at an unrecognizable place in medicine if you can just get 1% better every week.
Man, yeah. I'm gonna second that. I have nothing to follow up with that one. Just on the highlight reel for social media. Very good.
Well, that's good. Yeah. parting wisdom for the younglings. That was a Mandalorian reference, by the way. Oh no, you don't watch the Mandalorian? Come on, girl.
It was kind of background noise. I have seen the Star Wars in the correct order of how you should see them.
Nice.
So I at least get brownie points for that, right?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Absolutely, you do. You got to watch the Mandalorian. Oh, baby.
I'll watch it.
Did your husband force you to watch Star Wars in order of appearance? Yes. I see where it's at. All right. Yeah, I did the same thing for my wife, but she did think Baby Yoda was adorable, so she kind of hung in the Mandalorian with me. But that's an acceptable response, I suppose. At least we have Harry Potter. That's all right.
It's something.
Yeah.
I'll do better.
That's all you can do. 1% better. That's all you can do.
With every episode, just 1% better. This is all I have to give. But well, my guy, that's solid stuff. I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you imparting wisdom and taking your time for us listeners on my end of the episodes. If you haven't already, if you don't plan to, you're making a mistake. Go check out Coffee Break Hymns podcast. Go check out Austin's books. They're good stuff. Tales of the Street. I haven't read it. I don't plan on it. No offense. And I'm looking forward to the next books, man. So stoked already.
Good. Appreciate it. And thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. And to wrap it all up, as I end every single episode, my dog is scratching at the door, so we'll end it. As we end every episode, so with that.
The 22 at the Lips podcast is designed to support, not replace, the relationship that exists between a practitioner and his or her medical director. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host, guest, and not necessarily of Master Medics. The information provided during this podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for your approved protocols.